Namo Buddhaya. Good evening and welcome everyone to Buddha Dharma TV. I am Shawnee Yanpanich here from Bangkok, Thailand. Our program begins today invoking the blessings of world peace. Here is a group of Sri Lankan Buddhist monks to bless the troubled world with a popular Buddhist chanting. There are lots of Buddhists and some non-Buddhist Westerners who like to have a temporary ordination of a Buddhist monk and to try to live a life of a Buddhist monk for a short period of 2 weeks to a month. Here is a group of over 100 lay disciples, both male and female followers of Most Venerable Dr. Thích Bu Chan, the chief monk of Dien Bien Phuoc San Temple in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, getting ready to be ordained, and you can see how they look as a freshly temporary ordained novice.
Cầu xin cho tất cả tận bệnh của người đều được dứt khỏi,
trừ tai hại cũng chẳng có đến cho người.
cầu xin cho người được sự an vui trường thọ.
Cả bốn pháp chúc mừng đã sống lâu tháng đêm, an vui hân mạnh hằng đêm đến người. Là người đang yên mình lễ bái, cúng dường đến tam bảo, ta có lòng tôn kính các bằng tu hành tính, như là bằng trì giới, là bằng trưởng lão,
Tất cả phước cao hằng
có đến người. Cầu xin chư thiên hộ trì đến người, do nhờ oai đức của chư Phật, do nhờ oai đức của giáo pháp, do nhờ oai đức của chư tăng,
các sự an lạc thường thường đến người. Này,
đây là khóa xuất gia diệu duyên lần thứ 16 ở Thiền viện Phước Sơn. Hôm nay là mùng 2 Tết. Sư nhận thấy hiện tại là đang một mái tóc rất là dài, bây giờ đang
và các thức mặt để cha con là phản ta cha bà đạt thi đề.
Con đi cắt nha. Con đi cắt cho con. Cắt đi, cắt đi. Xong chưa xem?
Cô có súng không? Cô thơm lên.
Cái câu kia có đang rồi. Dạ chờ chút xíu. Bây giờ các vị
Rồi con có chưa? Hôm nay là mùng 2 Tết. Hồi nãy là có quay các cô, và bây giờ là quý vị thấy đó, anh này khóc, quay này lắm nè. Sao mà khóc đây?
Hạnh phúc lắm, được cạo chứ đâu phải đơn giản.
Sao anh khóc đây? Anh sư tương lai. Sao anh khóc vậy? Hả? Thích lòng sư khóc hay là đau khóc hay là vì sao? Hả?
Rất là chậm.
Sao con khóc? Con? Sao con khóc vậy? Hả? Vì sao con khóc?
Cái này là những dở quá sư bắt rồi.
Hả?
Cái này mới toan à, mà sao nó không đi đây không biết.
Vì sao con khóc con? Con trả lời sư đi.
Con có đâu rồi nói cho sư biết nha.
Hay là con thích quá con khóc à hay là sao? Hay là con bị ép tu con khóc?
Hạnh phúc quá. Này không được.
Đây là vị sư sáng lập tịnh xá Việt Ấn ở bên Ấn Độ.
Không đi thôi.
Đấy.
Kỳ không được.
Bây giờ mình không biết giọt nước mắt này là giọt nước mắt hạnh phúc hay là giọt nước mắt đau đớn đây mà khóc dữ vậy không biết.
Ồ, làm này không được rồi.
Đừng có.
Dạ.
Trong đời thì khỏi cần phải nước.
Chú đừng cái tóc này để làm gì đây?
Dạ con xuống tóc.
Vì nào mà chúng ta đã
Nhưng mà cái tóc này con định làm gì?
xong á, thì chúng ta di chuyển qua văn phòng. Lấy lao bên này, bên kia. Lại cái lấy, cái chỗ cái bàn đó, đây.
Đây là ngài siêu lý.
Qua văn phòng.
Hòa thượng tiến sĩ.
Sư Đen có ở đây không nào? Sư Đen di chuyển qua văn phòng để phát những cái bộ y, những cái vật dụng cho cái giới tử để chúng ta.
Chú này chú chờ đợi ngài xuất gia lâu lắm rồi là mà tóc dài.
Vì nào mà thiếu á là chúng ta mới nhận, còn vì nào không có, vì nào có rồi chúng ta không nhận nhé. Này đúng 4 rưỡi là chúng ta có mặt tại thiền đường Visakha để ban tổ chức hướng dẫn cho quý vị.
Chú lên khi nào? Dạ, chứ sao mà xuất gia thì ta để tóc dài dài tí cạo cho nó sướng chứ. Để tóc dài dài đây là cạo chú này, cạo chú này đi.
Linh, xin mời anh Linh. Anh Linh có ở đó không à? Có đây. Quý. Đây, anh Linh đây quý.
Rất đông thôi về. Bên này là giới tự nam, các ông sư tương lai.
Không hướng dẫn được.
Bây giờ là
mới được hướng dẫn. Ngày mai hướng dẫn, chiều mai sẽ hướng dẫn.
đấy. Mới mang tóc
Hướng dẫn cái cách đắp y thôi chứ đâu có làm lễ, có gì đâu mà không được sư. Hướng dẫn cách đắp y mặc y thôi. Hướng dẫn cái cách đắp y. Hướng dẫn
bố hôm sư.
cái đó là thí dụ thôi.
Thí dụ hả? Thí dụ đi.
Con sư này ổng.
Cô này chưa xong. Cho con.
Cô nhanh. Cái này có ít thôi quý cô cạo chứ đâu cần cái tụi con hả? Dạ không quý cô cạo được. Mình nhắc tóc rồi, mấy cô cạo được, mấy cô cắt tóc cạo được hết rồi hả? Dạ rồi nhắc hết rồi. Quý cô đi phụ cạo đi. Nhưng mà con
cô Thúy ơi.
dạ được cô cứ đi cạo.
Cô Thúy.
Con không lấy tóc lại hả? Con có lấy tóc lại không? Ngồi đi. Phải lấy cái tóc này. Nghe từ vì em ấy nghe con đưa.
Đây cô Thúy. Cô cũng cờ đầu luôn đúng không? Đây lấy ghế ngồi đây. Cho cô Thanh, nhờ cô Thanh còn luôn. Lấy ghế ngồi đây. Đây ngủ cái này nè.
Đẩy đi, đẩy xong đôi cho. Nhờ vị vị nào cắt con chờ cạo tóc. Dạ đúng rồi.
Hôm nay sư để sư đi review mỗi người một chút nha.
Hôm qua không có pháo hả sư?
Hả?
Hôm qua sư không có pháo hả?
Không, chú Thắng ơi. Lên.
Khoan, để con chụp cái hình đó sư.
Chụp đi. Sư Phước Lâm sao hay gặp mấy cái móc tóc dài trơn ha. Rồi. Anh này chắc anh chờ đợi ngày xuất gia lâu lắm rồi nè. Tóc dài quá trời luôn.
Có tóc dài hả?
Quá là
Ai tóc dài không?
không kìa sư. Rồi làm sư. Con đang chờ nãy giờ mình nhanh vậy đó, con sư làm lại đấy con. Sư làm trắng trắng tí.
Lấy sữa bột lên cho trắng trắng dễ thương.
Anh này là ảnh cũng trước khi anh làm chuẩn bị làm ông sư là anh đã chuẩn bị rất nhiều khóa thiền rồi. Vừa rồi học mấy khóa thiền được không?
Dạ 90 khóa.
Hả?
90 khóa.
90 khóa là 17, 90 khóa là 19 khóa đó.
Không, 9 khóa hay là 10 khóa đúng không? Đấy. Sau khi giờ 9 khóa 10 khóa thiền là bây giờ quyết định xuất gia làm ông sư nè. Đây là sư Vũ Ân với sư Phước Văn, là có một chú này mà được 2 sư lắm rồi. Cô ơi, cô Thúy ơi.
Dạ.
Trước khi cạo đầu cô làm gì, cô cột lên đầu cô nhiều dữ vậy? Cột cho dễ cắt hả?
Dạ không.
Hả?
Tóc cho bệnh nhân ung thư.
Sa thú đó là bây giờ Bồ Tát nên cho bệnh nhân ung thư đúng không?
Dạ.
Cô có cảm giác gì khi mà chuẩn bị cạo đầu?
Sao hả?
Hả?
Con cảm thấy nhẹ nhàng lắm.
Nhẹ nhàng lắm hả?
Dạ.
Và đang sẵn sàng chuẩn bị tóc để cho bệnh nhân ung thư hả?
Dạ.
Tuyệt vời. Chú Đực ơi. Cái cô này là ở Bình Phước mà hôm đầu sư nói xuống gặp chú đây mà bây giờ cũng quyết định của xuống góc luôn là. Chú Trực là
ai mà liên quan tới sư hay đi tu quá.
Chú Trực là cái mà hoa sen á, có thức ăn chay rồi có viên nán thô rồi đó.
Dạ.
Hai người đều có cái điểm giống là đều ở trong hai cái hoa viên, một người người Đồng Nai, người Bình Phước.
Dạ, được ở thôi chứ không phải là của em.
Nhưng mà vậy cũng vui rồi.
Hoa viên cũng đẹp lắm chú Đực.
Có dịp thì mời sư với lại chú về.
Cô chút nữa cô cho xin số điện thoại, xong rồi có gì bữa nào mà có thời gian á chở qua đón sư Bách, chở sư Bách qua đón luôn. Cô đi đợt này bao nhiêu ngày?
Dạ con đi
Tháng luôn hả? Ngon vậy.
không thắc mắc 2 tuần rồi. 08
Rồi.
39
Rồi.
22
Rồi.
88.
Chú Trực cũng có em trai hôm nay xuất gia luôn nè.
Biết đâu nó vài bữa hên nó giống sư Bách.
Đúng rồi.
Đi thử cái Bách đi thiệt luôn. Đúng rồi. Em lưu tên gì?
Dạ.
Phước Tùy Duyên. Bây giờ lưu pháp danh đi, đúng không? Rồi khi nào xuống tóc là kêu sư nha.
Dạ.
Sư để sư quay. Cô Tiên ơi, vị sứ nên đánh gì sư quay nè. Hả? Đi giá. Đây là sư Bande Ariya, người là sáng lập ra cái tịnh xá Việt Ấn ở bên Ấn Độ. Và hôm nay ngài về tham dự lễ thế pháp, và hôm nay là xuống tóc cho giới tử để đây là khóa xuất gia diêu duyên lần thứ 16 rồi quý vị ạ. Chú này cũng rất có duyên đó nha. Tiếng tóc hả? Rồi tiếng tóc sư mới đăng cái bài được lên xu hướng đó, gần 200.000 lượt xem rồi. Mới đăng á. Mới đăng hôm qua hay hôm kia gì đó. Hồi xưa làm chính là kênh Phước Sơn Media, kênh YouTube của chùa á. Phước Sơn Media. Được, nhưng mà để cho mấy vị cào chứ không cào khó lắm. Đây là ngài dạ. Rồi. Ngài Sư Lý, tiến sĩ, hòa thượng tiến sĩ đó nha.
Nam mô Bổn Sư Thích Ca Mâu Ni Phật. Quý giới tử, sau khi chúng ta được cạo đầu xong, chúng ta có nước bên cạnh đây, chúng ta phủi đi một chút cho nó sạch. Sau khi phủi xong thì vị nào chưa có y, chúng ta di chuyển xuống văn phòng. Được sư đen sẽ
đây là cô Phước Tự Duyên, được sư cô nhiều pháp mà.
Y của chị có chưa? Những vị nào chưa có y nha là sẽ xuống văn phòng. Sư đen sẽ hướng dẫn đưa y cho quý vị.
Tóc này là cô chuẩn bị để cho người ung thư đó.
Di chuyển về thiền đường Visakha. Vị nào xong rồi thì di chuyển về thiền đường Visakha luôn. Còn vị nào chưa xong trở lại.
Cô thấy cô đâu đó? Thấm nước.
Vị nào chưa có y thì đem theo. Về nhà đem theo nha. Vị nào chưa có y thì về nhà đem theo.
Bạn thế. You come here how many days?
Chiều nay
Only 4 days.
Yes. Another 3 days stay going back.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
Dạ.
Còn một số vị là chúng ta mà đã có y rồi. Vì nào mà chúng ta đã có y rồi mà đã hớt tóc xong thì quý vị xếp ghế lại giùm sư, lấy một cái chổi chúng ta quét lại, quét dọn tóc lại để cho nó sạch sẽ.
Cô đó của nước ngoài luôn. Chị Thắng ơi. Chị Thắng.
Vị nào mà đã hớt tóc xong, đã có y rồi, xin mời quý vị phát tâm là trồng cái ghế lại.
Sư dặn lúc cạo đầu cái sư mà sao không kêu vậy? Dặn lúc cạo đầu cái sư mà sao không kêu? Chú Phúc Thắng vừa tham gia trong đội tuần tra mà vừa băng niêm không, bây giờ vừa mới xuống tóc xong rồi chưa kịp quay này. Bây giờ chú đi đâu? Chú đâu vậy?
Bây giờ con xuống dưới văn phòng để con nhận đồ, mặc nhận bát.
Rồi ok, rồi đi nhận đi hả? Sao thấy cạo đầu sao thấy đâu rồi?
Dạ.
Ngày mai là thành ông sư rồi quý vị ạ. Đây nè, ngày mai là ông sư rồi. Bây giờ là nhận của nhận bác hả?
Dạ.
Rồi thì cứ nhận đi cái quay lại ha.
Dạ.
Bây giờ dạo
xin thông báo lại quý vị, quý giới tử sau khi chúng ta đã hớt tóc xong, chúng ta phủi tóc xong rồi, chúng ta vị nào chưa có, chúng ta di chuyển xuống văn phòng gặp sư đen để nhận bộ y. Vị nào đã có y rồi thì quý vị
bây giờ phải giới thiệu lại với hồi nãy cái cô mà phỏng vấn hồi nãy đó quý vị ạ. Nhưng mà bây giờ cái đầu, nhìn cái đầu này nhiều người không hiểu là đây là người hồi nãy. Bây giờ là một người mới rồi đây. Ông chờ xíu đi, sư đang quay phim.
Vị nào cắt tóc á, không có cạo đầu, không có y, chỉ đắp khăn ướt.
Ok. Rồi.
Khăn giấy chưa có thì liên hệ văn phòng nha. Xong rồi quý vị tạm thời về nhà, về góc của mình, về nơi của mình, quý vị sẽ tắm qua một sơ một cái. Đúng 4:30, 4:30 chúng ta tập trung tại thiền đường Visakha. Xin thông báo lại 4:30 quý vị sẽ tập hợp lại thiền đường Visakha. Vị nào chưa y thì liên hệ văn phòng xuống gặp sư đen để phát cho quý vị.
Đấy, bây giờ là mọi người sẽ nhìn không ra là cô Phước Tự Duyên hồi nãy mới phỏng vấn đấy. Được sư cô nhiệm pháp xuống tóc gần xong rồi.
Thay mặt ban tổ chức chúng tôi xin thông báo
rất nhiều người.
Các vị giới tử, sau khi chúng ta làm lễ thế pháp xong, những vị nào chưa đi, chúng ta di chuyển xuống văn phòng gặp sư đen.
Sư kêu lên đấy chứ. Cái này Cái này Phước chỉ định.
Sau khi chúng ta nhận đi rồi, đi bát này chúng ta đi di chuyển về cái nơi ở của mình. Tắm sơ qua khoảng tầm 4 rưỡi, chúng ta tập trung tại thiền đường Visakha để ban tổ chức hướng dẫn cho những nghi thức chuẩn bị cho buổi lễ ngày mai. Nam mô Bổn Sư Thích Ca Mâu Ni Phật.
Khóa này không có người đặc biệt giống như khóa trước à. Khóa trước có người đi vô chơi mà cạo đầu lộn xuất gia lộn sư luôn. À, ngồi coi á, bị đời nó cạo luôn lộn sư luôn.
Trời ơi, xuống tóc cái nhìn đẹp rồi. Giống như là tu từ đời nào.
Cô tự nhiên ơi, nhìn qua đây tí đi. Đấy, đẹp liền. Đẹp lắm. Cô có biết cô đang được ai xuống tóc cho cô đó không? Hả? Cái cô mà đang cạo cho cô là cái cô mà dạy Bali cho cô học đó. À. Đâu có nhận cái bát lại thôi đó hả? Không còn gì nữa hả? À.
Cấp tôi bắt con mua mấy vị cho con 2 cái rồi.
Vậy thôi, vậy về tắm đi.
Về khi nào là mặc y chứ mai chưa ạ?
4 giờ rưỡi đi qua bên kia học kinh.
Qua trường qua bên
Thì điều biết sao học kinh. Nhưng mà y là vẫn chưa sử dụng ngày mai chưa?
Phải đi qua bển cho kiểm có đầy đủ phụ tùng chưa thiếu cái gì là trải nghiệm thêm.
Rồi bây giờ về tắm nữa. Ủa đâu?
Nói chung là giờ về tắm cho má.
Ok, về tắm bắt bạn đi.
cho con mượn cái chìa khóa đi con về. Hướng dẫn chị không? Ở bên này là
Đúng rồi. Về tóc chưa tắm. Có lấy bánh xà phòng mới luôn.
dạ lấy một bộ thôi, đâu cần nhiều đâu.
Ý là lấy bánh xà phòng mới luôn tắm cho nó hay.
Thay mặt ban tổ chức chúng tôi xin thông báo quý vị giới thiệu nào sau khi chúng ta hớt tóc xong, vì nào chưa có y chuyển tới văn phòng nhận y, đã có y rồi.
Rồi khoan từ từ.
Khắp tâm đem ghế di chuyển lại cái chỗ.
Rồi sao rồi, cảm giác sao rồi? Hả?
Cảm giác là khó tả.
Bây giờ nghe cái đầu không mát mát đúng không?
Thì chúng ta sẽ tâm lấy chỗ chúng ta quét cái tóc lại để trả lại mặt bằng cho sư Trung.
Có phải đây hồi nãy là người khóc đây không? Hả không? Có phải hồi nãy cậu đầu khóc không? Hôm trước hả? Dạ cái anh hồi nãy cậu đầu khóc à? Đây là một người nữa. Chắc mình phải quay thành clip nữa quá.
Danh ơi danh. Ở đây nè.
Đây.
Có một người dũng mạnh tấn công hả? Con sư chỉ con cái này cái công tơ này con chưa biết dùng đây cầm.
Cô này trùm đây là cậu rồi hả? Chưa thì mở ra chứ con ngại gì hả? Không cạo hả? Có cạo thì sợ cái gì?
Đâu có sợ gì đâu, nắng mà.
Do nắng hả?
Thay mặt ban tổ chức chúng tôi xin thông báo.
Đây, những mái tóc.
Vị nào mà chúng ta đã phủ tóc xong thì vị nào chưa có y chúng ta di chuyển xuống văn phòng nhận y từ sư đen. Vị nào đã có y rồi thì chúng ta phát tâm xếp ghế lại.
Đây, sự ưu tiên quay các cô tại vì là các chú kia là mái tóc nó ngắn bình thường, còn các cô là để mái tóc cả đời, mà bây giờ là các cô đã hy sinh để mà xuống tóc.
Có y rồi, vị nào có y thì thôi nha. Đi về tắm một cái 4 rưỡi chúng ta sẽ tập trung lại thiền đường Visakha. Có. Xin thông báo lại sau khi chúng ta làm lễ tiếp pháp xong, vị nào đã chưa có y chúng ta di chuyển xuống văn phòng để nhận y. Vị nào đã có y rồi, một số vị thì chúng ta sẽ phát tâm xếp ghế, dọn vệ sinh cái nơi này để quét tóc lại, trả lại mặt bằng cho sư Phúc.
Cô đi đâu đang cạo lại dở mà.
Vị nào chưa có y thì chúng ta sẽ nhận y ở văn phòng. Sau này chúng ta về tắm rửa sơ qua lúc 4 giờ 30 chúng ta tập trung tại thiền đường Visakha.
Cô tên gì cô?
Và quý vị lưu ý chúng ta sẽ đem theo y.
Tiên hả?
Y theo để sư hướng dẫn để chuẩn bị cho lễ ngày mai. Nam mô Bổn Sư Thích Ca Mâu Ni Phật.
Lấy ra thổ y đem lên. Hả? Một bộ thôi chứ kia 2 bộ. Đem nó liền, đem ra liền đây.
Chặt cạo lại luôn hả?
Không chạm một người bằng tê. Không chạm một
Like this. Yeah, India. 10 rupees. 10 rupees. Yeah, 10 rupees. Okay. Đây cái này nó không có kẹt tóc. Nó không kẹt tóc. Có 10 ruby cũng tầm 3.000 mấy một cái. Sư mua cả 10 cả ngàn cái về sử dụng hết rồi.
Mấy năm đó là một năm mới được quay lần, mà năm nay là quay được 2 lần. Lý do là thiền viện Phước Sơn lần đầu tiên tổ chức xuất gia giao duyên vào dịp Tết. Còn lâu nay là rằm tháng 5. Mỗi năm là rằm tháng 5 mới có. Năm nay là lần thứ 2 rồi. Và khóa này cũng rất đặc biệt. Ngài Sivali là đến từ nước nào? Sri Lanka hả cô? Người Sri Lanka nhưng mà ở Canada. Rồi ngài Aditya là Ấn Độ. Đấy, đặc biệt lắm. Con có xuống đất không con? Không có thôi. Đi tìm ai chuẩn bị xuống đất đâu ta? Đây. Hồi nãy tóc dài hay tóc ngắn?
Cái kia là phải tóc ngắn mới cạo lại được. Tóc một cạo rồi mới cạo lại thôi. Còn cái thằng này là cạo rồi. Đó thôi, cái này tiền này như thế nào cạo ok được. Rồi xong rồi đó con.
Sao
nhăn dữ vậy?
Giới thiệu được xin thông báo vì nào mà chúng ta đã được phủ tóc xong quý vị sẽ có y thì chúng ta di chuyển tới văn phòng để nhận y. Vị nào đã có y rồi thì chúng ta di chuyển, chúng ta đi về phòng 6 giờ này cũng tầm 4 rưỡi chúng ta tập trung tại thiền đường Visakha. Còn vì các vị sẽ những vị nào mà đã có y rồi chúng ta phát tâm
cô nhớ để cho sư quay tí. Đấy. Hả? Mà tóc hồi nãy dài không? Có khóc hay sao? Cô này cổ cười chứ không có khóc.
Một giới thiệu nam chúng ta đã phủ tóc xong thì quý vị phát tâm di chuyển những cái chồng ghế xuống chỗ nhà ăn trên đường Thường Sư.
Sao hồi nãy giờ thì sư đi quay miếng mà chưa gặp cô nào vừa cạo đầu vừa khóc hết trơn nha. Khóa trước khóc quá đời luôn mà khóa này không thấy khóc. Cô nhăn lên cô khóc rồi cho sư quay cái coi. Khóa 15 người ta khóc quá trời luôn, khóa này chưa thấy ai khóc ấy. Khóa 15 nhiều cô khóc lắm mà khóa này nãy giờ chưa thấy ai khóc hết.
Người ta chuẩn bị trước hết rồi cho nên là người ta cạo rất là hoan hỉ. Không biết con gái đâu nó thích tóc. 16 là mừng rồi. Dạ qua Tết rồi thầy là quá vui.
Có ai khóc không? Hả? Sao khóa 15 này, khóa này nó đặc biệt vậy ta? Khóa 15 là chưa đi quay phim gặp mấy cô vừa cạo vừa khóc. Bây giờ họ cạo họ cười luôn. Đó.
Vui đó sư. Nay cạo bò tóc đời nguyện tất cả muôn biết sạch.
Xin mời sư Thúc Đạt. Sư Thúc Đạt có đây không ạ?
0909
Nay
245 234.
tóc đời nguyện tất cả muôn.
Đúng rồi. Không phải như là khó kết bạn với sư á. Cô nhắn cái tin cho sư để sư về sẽ kết bạn cho. Điện thoại con Tiên không? Điện thoại của con Tiên không? Nhắn cho sư sẽ kết bạn. Sư Bửu Thắng. Tại sư không đem điện thoại theo á. Nhắn chưa? Nhắn rồi hả? Đây. Từ từ. Anh này là anh cạo đầu mà anh cười nè. Nãy giờ hỏi sư mà sư không biết ai. Khóc thiệt nè. Nãy giờ sư đi tìm nè.
Nay cạo bò tóc đời nguyện tất cả muôn loài dứt sạch hết phiền não.
Chứ mà đi con lấy tóc đó chứ. Hồi nãy giờ cứ dẫn nó tìm người khóc mà giờ thấy người ta khóc mình quay hồi hộp quá.
Dứt sạch hết phiền não hướng đời nguyện tất cả muôn dứt sạch hết phiền não
Rồi, xin lỗi nha.
xà bông vô không có miếng xà bông nữa nhưng tội nghiệp nhỏ quá vậy.
Sao tội nghiệp vậy?
Không có xà bông thầy.
Không có xà bông hả?
Dạ.
Nhưng mà cổ không khóc.
Không, tại con biết con làm nhẹ nhẹ.
Cổ cười nữa chứ cổ không khóc.
Đúng rồi. Cũng mừng lắm đó.
Đây nè, mà cạo nữa còn đẹp dữ nữa. Người ta đầy sẵn rồi cô ơi.
Chơi vụ nè, chơi vụ nè. Ngồi xuống cạo luôn đi con. Hả? Biết đâu cạo đẹp thiệt sao? À bây giờ mình thấy mái tóc bạc này để cho Thiên Ngân thì quay cô này cái. Nãy giờ thấy toàn trẻ không mà bây giờ nó có mái tóc bạc này. Sao cô có xuống tóc không? Nhấp hả? Chơi luôn đi.
Cô bao nhiêu tuổi rồi cô? Dạ con ạ. Cô bao nhiêu tuổi?
Bao nhiêu tuổi rồi?
74 ạ.
74, tuyệt vời.
74 là cô còn sống hơn 60 năm cuộc đời là hơn 14 năm rồi hả cô?
Đấy, ngày bữa chánh giảng 60 tính năm 70 tính tháng đó. Biết chưa? Cho nên bây giờ xuống tóc được là mừng lắm. À. Thôi có đau không mà nó cúi gầm như vậy?
Cúi để con cạo gáy.
Cạo cái sao ạ? À.
Cái này mà đau gì?
Ủa cái đầu của bạn này sao cạo lỡ dở vậy? Cái model này đẹp nè. Con pháp danh con là gì con?
Dạ Thuận Hòa.
Hả?
Dạ Thuận Hòa.
Thuận Hòa hả?
Dạ.
Con có xuống tóc không con? Không.
Bận cái gì cũng đẹp.
Cạo luôn. Cô á. Trời luôn cạo luôn chứ. Hả?
Còn đi làm ạ.
Cái gì cũng đẹp, sau khi cạo cái gì cũng đẹp hết, nhiều người riêng đến nỗi là cạo hoài đều đi anh kêu. Gái ta
đó. Đây là đôi bạn thân rất thân nè. Rủ nhau xuống tóc hết nè, rồi hai con giới thiệu cái.
Dạ, con là Nguyễn Thị Phượng, pháp danh Diệu Âm.
Đến từ đâu?
Dạ, con đến từ Long An.
Long An, rồi còn con?
Con tên là Phước Duyên. Con tên là Linh, pháp danh Phước Duyên. Con cũng đến từ Long An giống chị.
Đã không? Vậy là hai người là bạn bè đúng không?
Dạ không.
Không phải hả?
Dạ, tại vì con ở Cần Đước, còn bé ở Cần Duộc.
Như vậy là đều là có chữ Cần giống nhau, chữ
dạ.
Long giống nhau.
Dạ, đồng hương nhưng mà
lên đây mới gặp.
À,
rồi hai con bây giờ xuất gia tròn khóa không hay là xuất gia luôn?
Dạ, xuất gia tròn khóa.
Xuất gia tròn khóa chứ không có xuất gia luôn đúng không?
Dạ.
Còn con?
Dạ, con xuất gia gieo duyên tròn khóa.
À, gieo duyên tròn khóa. Xa thú.
Đủ duyên thì con sẽ xuất gia luôn.
Rồi suy nghĩ nếu được có thể đủ đó.
Dạ.
Hả? Bây giờ không như ngày xưa nữa, nếu mà cần thiết thì đội mái tóc giả lên kiểu gì chả có.
Không hết đi làm đâu, đi tu được. Dạ con xin phép.
Rồi cảm ơn các con. Đi ra đi. Sao nhấp kéo giờ, nhấp chưa? Nhấp cái nữa chứ sư qua cái, nhấp cái nữa đi. Nhấp cái nữa đi. Nhấp cái nửa đầu luôn. Phân nửa luôn. Hả? Phân nửa luôn là
là đi luôn.
Quý vị có biết mỗi lần mà quay xuất gia, quay xuống tóc này là thiền viện Phước Sơn là một năm mới một lần được quay. Tại vì là rằm tháng 5 mới có. Đấy. Cứ mỗi khóa là rằm tháng 5 tổ chức. Đúng rồi. Đây là lần đầu tiên tổ chức vào dịp Tết. Cạo xong nhưng mà sao tóc còn nhiều vậy?
Nó sẽ ra cạo chút xíu cạo lại.
Con từ pháp danh bữa trước sư quay này pháp danh con là gì?
Dạ Minh Huệ.
Minh Huệ. Rồi bây giờ xuất gia luôn hay là xuất gia giao duyên?
Dạ con xuất gia giao duyên.
Sao mạnh dạn nó tùy duyên hợp duyên đi luôn. Đấy. Hả? Giao duyên trọng khóa đúng không?
Dạ.
Rồi, xa thú. Rồi quay người nữa thôi nè. Cô là pháp danh là gì cô?
Dạ Phước Đức ạ.
Phước Đức. Quê ở đâu?
Dạ con ở Bình Định.
Bình Định. Con gái Bình Định đánh roi đi quyền, bây giờ vô cạo đầu đi tu luôn nè. Đi tròn khóa luôn đúng không?
Dạ.
Ừ. 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 Cô là cùng quê với ngài hòa thượng trụ trì đó.
Dạ.
Rồi để mình quay cho mấy ông Nam lên nửa tí chứ. Hai sư cạo đầu người ta sao hai sư vui dữ vậy, hai sư cười dữ vậy? Hả?
Có được huynh đệ mới. Sao đạo hữu này giống ông Phước Chí Minh ta? Đạo hữu này giống dê á. Giống ông Phước Chí Minh đúng không?
Hả?
Nhìn trang như xa hữu.
Sư thiện tu, thiện tư. Còn sư là sư gì sư?
Chưa sư.
Không, đang hỏi sư á. Đang qua sư mà. Đừng hỏi sư mà. Sư á, pháp danh sư là gì á?
Em Phước Trí á.
À, sư Phước Trí. Con
Đạo hữu.
chú là pháp danh gì?
Chú Hiền.
Hả?
Chú Hiền.
Ngày mai là sẽ là ông sư. Đây quý vị này, ngày mai này sẽ ông sư này mặc y vô đẹp trai lắm này. Đấy. Sư ở đầu xa mà sư thấy sư cười là sư biết rồi. Đấy.
Sư cho con cái hồi nãy đi. Hồi nãy mới đưa cho ông Vũ rồi.
Sao? Chú pháp danh là gì chú?
Con chưa có pháp danh.
Chưa có pháp danh. Chú ở đâu, quê ở đâu?
Con quê Long An.
Ủa sao hôm nay sư gặp nhiều người Long An ghê ta? Rồi chú xuất gia duyên trọng khóa đúng không?
Dạ đúng là lần đầu tiên.
Rồi làm sao chú biết Phước Sơn mà vô đây chú xuất gia duyên đây?
Dạ con tìm trên mạng.
Tìm trên mạng, tuyệt vời. Rồi, cảm ơn chú. Trên mạng mà tìm ở đâu chứ? Ồ, tóc này. Tóc này để cho người ung thư á.
Tóc nữ.
Nữ hả? Tóc này nam ngắn quá bỏ hả?
Quý vị giới tử nam sau khi chúng ta đã làm xong, chúng ta giúp ban tổ chức di chuyển lên phần ghế này về chai đường. Hai sư. Đây, xin mời quý giới tử. 3-4 vị giới tử, chúng ta di chuyển cái này vào trong chai đường dùm sư. Chai đường nha.
Đấy. Người này cạo đầu trắng quá đi à.
Khóa 15 cả khóa 16.
Khóa 15 hoặc khóa 16.
Phần tóc lại trả lại mặt bằng cho sư Phước Trung cho ngày mai hôm nay.
Cô là xuất gia tròn khóa không hay là xuất gia luôn cô? Hả? Con đến từ tỉnh nào? Hải Phòng. Làm sao con biết có xuất gia duyên khóa 16 mà con vô đây? Xem trên website con biết hả? Rồi đã quay người nữa nè. Quay người nữa thôi. Đây là khóa xuất gia giao duyên lần thứ 16. Và hôm nay là mùng 2 Tết. Và hôm nay là lễ thế phát xong. Thì mai ngày mùng 3 là chính thức làm lễ xuất gia giao duyên khóa thứ 16. Và thiền viện Phước Sơn là tối ngày mai cũng là khai mạc cái khóa trùng trùng tâm tạng luôn quý vị ạ. Và hiện tại dưới thiền viện quốc tế thì đang có khóa thiền 10 ngày. Rất nhiều khóa tu học, khóa xuất gia, khóa trùng trùng tâm tạng được liên tục tổ chức ở thiền viện Phước Sơn. Đây là ở phía sau trấn điện của Thiên Nữ Phước Sơn. Ủa anh đi cạo đầu luôn hả? Hả? Cô Tuệ này chuyên đi dụng nít từ nãy giờ thấy cô không coi. Hồi nãy đâu đồng ý đâu. Hả? Khát không? Có khát không? Ngược nắng quá hả?
Các vị giới tính nam, sau khi quý vị đã hớt tóc xong, quý vị hỗ trợ ban tổ chức di chuyển.
Con gái hay con trai vậy?
Về chai đường, cũng giống như di chuyển 2 bộ loa về chai đường dùng cho ban tổ chức.
Nói thật với cạo đầu không biết con gái hay con trai, con nít khó phân biệt quá. Cái gì?
Con cũng muốn nhà.
Hả? Vô duyên quá à. Người ta muốn cạo đầu mà sư cô là cản à. Hả? Em bé này muốn cạo đầu mà sư cô cản là sư cô làm sai pháp rồi nè. Hả? Em bé này muốn đòi cạo đầu hả? Em bé thấy cạo đầu đòi cạo đầu kìa. Mà em bé cái đòi cạo đầu mà bị cản kìa. Đó, đang xin cạo đầu kìa.
Lâu lắm rồi đấy. Ở tại chùa lâu lắm rồi mà mẹ cản kìa.
Đó. Nó đòi cạo đầu mà bây giờ là
hôm nay mới phát hiện ra.
Theo cô Tuệ cạo đầu cho nào.
Bây giờ cô mẹ là không cho rồi. Cản duyên rồi. Con mẹ con cũng mới sinh ra.
Thế nào là em bé.
Ủa là con của cô đó hả? Hai đứa luôn hả?
Dạ một đứa đây.
Một đứa này hả? Cạo đầu luôn hả? Hai mẹ con rủ nhau cạo đầu luôn hả? Hay chưa? Con có biết cạo đầu làm gì không con? Con cạo đầu làm gì? Con cạo đầu làm gì đây? Hả?
Cạo đầu làm sự đi cô nha.
Đó, đây quay được cảnh này nè. Ảnh không muốn về luôn, ảnh đòi cạo đầu nè. Đây nè, ngó đi, nó nằm xuống nó không chịu về kìa. Nó đòi cạo đầu kìa. Đây. Bây giờ phát hiện được một sư cô cản duyên người ta tu hành nè, người ta đòi cạo đầu mà bắt người ta về kìa. Đấy. Đấy, bây giờ em bé muốn cạo đầu mà lôi về không chịu về. Đó, bạn cũng cạo được kìa.
Nó cạo đi, cạo đi. Đừng có giữ, cạo đi.
Trời ơi, anh không anh muốn cạo đầu mà mẹ cản không cho cạo kìa.
Tội nghiệp em bé.
Khóc luôn. Em là cạo đầu mà mẹ không cho là một khúc là không.
Mình cạo được mà con không cho cạo là sao?
Rất
cái này mà đưa lên TikTok mà
rất là tội. Rồi sư trở về sư đưa thôi. Em bé đòi cạo đầu mà mẹ không cho, khóc quá trời kìa. Đấy, nó là cạo đầu mà mẹ không cho. Bò trên đất luôn á. Rồi thôi, dài quá rồi, xin ngưng video đây.
How interesting to see how devoted and dedicated these fresh novices are. Maybe one day we should try it for ourselves. Now, here is Most Venerable Savati Tamika, an Austrian Buddhist monk who talks about his long and somewhat hard path that he has traveled to become a Buddhist monk. Here is Venerable Master to talk about it and sixth part of his series of talks entitled My Spiritual Journey. Welcome.
So there I was. I was in one of the poorest and one of the remotest areas in northern Uttar Pradesh, in a rural area in northern India. A small half-built temple with a Sri Lankan monk, Venerable Sangaratana, and I liked him. In the morning he took me across the road into the ancient ruins and told me that this is where the Buddha did this is where the Buddha did that. It was just enchanting because there was, early in the morning there were peacocks, a peacock and his mate sort of walking through the mist and the trees, and there were langur monkeys, and it was really lovely. And knowing that it was actually a place where the Buddha had spent some 20 years of his life really inspired me. So I ended up staying there for about 2 weeks. But still I hadn't decided whether I should be ordained there. But certainly that thought occurred to me. So after about 2 weeks I left, and then I returned to where I had been staying in Sarnath. And then I visited some other places, and so I got to know quite a few interesting people and visited quite a lot of places. But eventually I decided I'm going to go back to Sravasti and become a monk. So I went back, and then I spent several months there, during which time Venerable Sangharatana taught me the preliminaries of Pali, what ordination involved, etc., etc., etc. And one day he said to me, okay, tomorrow several other monks are going to arrive, and I'm going to ordain you, or I'm going to accept you as a samanera. Are you ready? And this came as a bit of a surprise to me, and I said, yes, yes I am. And indeed several people did arrive. I can't remember the name of some of them, but one of them was Venerable Chandaratana, once again a Sri Lankan. He was a professor of Pali and Sanskrit at Lucknow University. Once again we remained friends for many years. And what happened was early in the morning those monks arrived, we had breakfast together, and then we all went out to what was known as the Ananda Bodhi tree in the ruins of Jetavana, and I'd already shaved my head, and we underwent the ceremony, and I became a novice Buddhist monk, and that was that. And it was as I took off my lay clothes, I sort of felt as if something unwanted was sort of falling away from me. And then as I put on for the first time, rather uncomfortably, my robe, I felt like I had come home. It was an aspiration that I'd had for quite a few years, and I had undergone continual frustrations where it nearly happened but in the end didn't. And now it actually had happened. I had taken the first step in becoming a member of the Buddha's Sangha, and I felt absolutely wonderful. And we all sat together under the Ananda Bodhi tree for some time. We chanted some suttas. I already knew the Metta Sutta. I'd learnt the Metta Sutta by that time. And then everybody else, Venerable Sangharatana and the presiding monks, we all walked back to the temple. Now it happened to be during the rainy season, and that part of the country is very low and very soggy in the rainy season. There's water all over the place, large bodies of water everywhere. And as we were walking back, we passed an area where there was a great deal of water, and just a little from the bank where the path was a lotus growing. And I'd seen lotuses before, but only from a distance, out in the middle of the pond or over there. And this was the first one I'd seen close up. And it was so beautiful, and it seemed to be an auspicious day for me. So I decided I'm going to get that lotus. So I stopped there and assessed how far it was from the bank of the puddle. Well, that's what it was. It was a large puddle that I could get that lotus. And Venerable Sangharatana looked back and said to me, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm just going to get that lotus." And he said, "Well, be careful." And off they went back into the temple. And so I I calculated that if I put my foot here and the second foot there, I'd be able to reach it. Seemed easy enough. I put my foot there and I sunk almost up to my chest in mud. So I didn't have to lean down to get the lotus. I had to sort of look up. So I picked the thing and I got out, and my brand new robe was covered with water and water plants and mud. I looked awful and I felt very bad. So I walked back to the temple with my lotus. And when Venerable Sangharatana saw the state I was in, he was not pleased. He was actually quite annoyed. And then he gave me my first lesson as a monk. And he said, "Why did you have to pick that flower? Now that you've picked it, now that you possess it, in an hour or two it's going to be limp and die. If you'd have left it where it was, you could have enjoyed it tomorrow and the next day, and other people walking past could have enjoyed it too. But because you wanted to own it, you have in a sense destroyed it. Now go and clean yourselves up and etc." And I felt really very bad. But that was my first lesson as a Buddhist monk, as a novice.
Jataka stories are the recollection and stories of a very few previous existence of the Buddha, who was then known as a Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva means one who is striving hard to serve all beings selflessly. These stories are excellent sources of motivation that lead us to be on the right path in the directions of our lives.
กุณาและชาดกว่าด้วยนางนกดูว่าวในการก่อนครานั้นภูเขาหิมพานต์อันทรงไว้ซึ่งแผ่นดินมีโอสถทุกชนิดมากมายไปด้วยดอกไม้สวยงามนานาชนิดหมู่สัตว์น้อยใหญ่ต่างใช้ชีวิตอยู่ในป่าอันอุดมสมบูรณ์อย่างผาสุกในครั้งนั้นมีนกดูว่าวชื่อว่ากุณาละอยู่ตัวหนึ่งเป็นนกที่มีปีกและขนงดงามยิ่งนักนกดูว่าวกุณาละนั้นมีนางนกดูว่าวที่คอยเป็นบริวารอยู่ถึง 3,500 ตัวทุกครั้งที่นกดูว่าวกุณาละจะเดินทางไปหนใดก็จะมีนางนก2 ตัวคอยคาบท่อนไม้ไว้เพื่อให้กุณาละเกาะตรงกลางแล้วพากุณาละบินไปทุกแห่งที่ต้องการไปเพื่อมิให้กุณาละต้องเหน็ดเหนื่อยจากการบินเองไม่เพียงเท่านั้นยังมีเหล่านางนกดูว่าวอีก500 ตัวบินไปเบื้องล่างเผื่อว่านกกุณาละตกจากท่อนไม้ก็จะมีพวกมันคอยรองรับอยู่ส่วนด้านบนก็มีฝูงนางนกดูว่าวอีก500 ตัวคอยบินบังแดดไว้ด้วยนอกจากนี้ด้านข้างทั้งซ้ายและขวาก็มีฝูงนางนกดูว่าวอีกฝั่งละ500 ตัวบินขนาบไว้เพื่อไม่ให้นกกุณาละต้องโดนความร้อนความหนาวหญ้าและละอองน้ำค้างใดๆส่วนอีก500 ตัวก็บินนำหน้าเพื่อไม่ให้ผู้คนด้านล่างอย่าได้ขว้างปาสิ่งใดใส่กุณาละได้เลยอีก500 ตัวข้างหน้าก็บินกันไว้เพื่อไม้จะคอยกันกอไม้กิ่งไม้ต้นไม้ต่างๆหินหรือนกใหญ่ชนิดอื่นที่จะมารังควานได้ถัดไปก็ยังมีนางนกอีก500 ตัวบินอยู่ข้างหน้าคอยพรรณนาด้วยถ้อยคำที่อ่อนหวานไพเราะด้วยประสงค์จะไม่ให้นกกุณาละต้องเงียบเหงาไม่เพียงเท่านั้นยังมีนกอีก500 ตัวบินกระจายไปทั่วทุกทิศเพื่อหาผลไม้เลิศรสให้กุณาละทานเพื่อมิให้ต้องได้หิวในระหว่างการเดินทางนี้ถึงแม้ว่านกบริวารเหล่านั้นจะพานกกุณาละบินท่องเที่ยวไปทั่วทุกทิศและคอยปรนนิบัตินกกุณาละอย่างเต็มที่เพียบพร้อมแต่นกกุณาละกลับคอยกล่าวถ้อยคำเหยียดหยามหยาบคายใส่ฝูงนกบริวารอยู่ไม่หยุดหย่อนนกกุณาละนั้นมีสหายนกอยู่1 ตัวชื่อว่านกปุณณมุขะ นกปุณณมุขะนั้นก็มีนางนกคอยบำเรออยู่เช่นกันแต่มีอยู่เพียง350ตัวแบ่งออกเป็นกลุ่มละ50ตัวนอกจากนี้นกปุณณมุขะยังต่างจากนกกุณาละตรงที่พญานกปุณณมุขะมักจะกล่าวถ้อยคำสรรเสริญเหล่านางนกบริวารเหล่านั้นอยู่ตลอด
ดีมากจ้าพวกน้องหญิงทั้งหลายถ้าเหนื่อยก็พักกันนะจ๊ะน่ารักอย่างเนี้ยพี่รักพวกเจ้าตายเลย
วันหนึ่งนกทั้งสองได้มาพบกันและพูดคุยกันนกปุณณมุขะนั้นทราบดีว่านกกุณาละนั้นมักจะพูดจาไม่ดีกับนกบริวารอยู่เสมอจึงถามด้วยความสงสัย
สหายเอ๋ยเหตุใดเล่าท่านถึงได้มักกล่าวถ้อยคำไม่ดีต่อนางนกบริวารของท่านความจริงแล้วต่อให้เป็นหญิงถึงแม้จะประพฤติไม่ดีต่อเราแต่เราก็ยังต้องพูดดีต่อนางเหล่านั้นแล้วเนี่ยนกบริวารเหล่านี้ปรนิบัติท่านดีถึงเพียงนี้เหตุไฉนท่านถึงได้ดูด่าว่ากล่าวพวกนางพูดจาไม่ดีกับนางเยี่ยงนั้นเล่า
โธเพื่อนเอ๋ยเราน่ะคงไม่เลิงล่ากับสาวๆได้เก่งเหมือนท่านหรอกอย่าสนใจเราเลย
ดูถ้าพอพูดเรื่องนี้ไปแล้วจะอารมณ์ไม่ดีไปก่อนดีกว่าเราไว้วันหลังค่อยมาคุยใหม่
อยู่มาวันหนึ่งนกปุณณมุขะก็เกิดป่วยหนักขึ้นอาการป่วยรุนแรงขึ้นทุกวันจนเหล่านางบริวารของนกปุณณมุขะต่างก็กลัวว่านกปุณณมุขะจะตายจากและเกรงว่าหากนกปุณณมุขะตายไปจริงๆพวกตนควรจะทำเยี่ยงไรเมื่อคิดได้ดังนั้นนางนกบริวารทั้งหมดก็บินหนีนกปุณณมุขะไปอาศัยเป็นบริวารของนกกุณาละจนหมดสิ้น
เอาแต่ไอ้ข้อแค่อย่างเงี้ยจะรอดไหมเนี่ยไปดีกว่าเราเดี๋ยวติดโรคละซวยเลย
รอด้วยข้าไปด้วยไปอยู่กับนกกุณาละดีกว่าข้าน่ะไม่เอาด้วยแล้ว
ฝ่ายนกกุณาละเมื่อเห็นฝูงนกบริวารของนกปุณณมุขะบินมาหาตนกันเป็นจำนวนมากก็ถามนกบริวารเหล่านั้นด้วยถ้อยคำหยาบคายว่า
นี่อีพวกนกถอยทั้งหลายพวกเอ็งบินมาหาข้าทำไมเนี่ยทำไมไม่ไปเฝ้าผัวของพวกเอ็งล่ะไอ้นกสถุน
คือว่าท่านนกปุณณมุขะของเราน่ะเอาแต่ป่วยไอ้กระสอบกระแสะจะตายวันตายพรุ่งก็ไม่รู้พวกข้าจะอยู่ไปทำไมสู้บินมาหาท่านนี้ดีกว่าหรือท่านกุณาละ
ใช่ท่านไม่สนรับพวกเราเป็นบริวารเพิ่มหรือท่านกุณาละดูสิพวกเราสวยใสเช้งกระเดะออกขนาดเนี้ยชอบไหม
เมื่อได้ฟังดังนั้นนกกุณาละก็แสดงอาการฉุนเฉียวเกรี้ยวกราดดุด่าบรรดานกบริวารของนกปุณณมุขะด้วยถ้อยคำหยาบคายต่างๆนานา
น้อยอีพวกทอยพวกมึงนี่จริงๆเลยนะพอผัวมึงเจ็บป่วยเนี่ยแทนที่พวกมึงจะอยู่ดูแลนี่กลับมาหาผัวใหม่อีพวกชั่วอีพวกจันไรไปไกลๆหน้ากูเดี๋ยวนี้นะอีพวกไพร่
หลังจากดุด่าบรรดานกบริวารของนกปุณณมุขะแล้วนกกุณาละจึงทราบว่านกปุณณมุขะนั้นป่วยหนักจึงรีบบินมาเยี่ยมสหายพร้อมอยู่ดูแลป้อนอาหารป้อนยาจนอาการของนกปุณณมุขะทุเลาขึ้น
เป็นไงบ้างสหายเรายาที่กินน่ะทำให้อาการท่านทุเลาขึ้นไหม
ขอบคุณท่านมากนะท่านกุณาละถ้าไม่ได้ท่านช่วยไว้ข้าคงไม่รอดแน่
นกกุณาละอยู่ปรนนิบัติดูแลนกปุณณมุขะอยู่ไม่นานอาการป่วยของนกปุณณมุขะก็ดีขึ้นและหายเป็นปลิดทิ้งเมื่ออาการป่วยทุเลาขึ้นเหล่านางนกบริวารทั้งหลายที่เคยทิ้งนกปุณณมุขะไว้ก็ทยอยกันบินกลับมาเพื่อปรนนิบัตินกปุณณมุขะเหมือนเดิมทั้งหาอาหารผลไม้และเครื่องดื่มต่างๆมาให้
ผัวขาพวกเมียกลับมาแล้วค่ะหิวไหมคะเดี๋ยวเมียจะไปหาผลไม้มาให้
แหมผัวคะดูหน้าแล้วท่าทางหายดีแล้วนะคะอย่างนี้ค่อยน่าอยู่ด้วยหน่อย
เมื่อเห็นว่านกบริวารของนกปุณณมุขะต่างบินกลับมาเพื่อจะมาปรนนิบัตินกปุณณมุขะเหมือนเดิมแล้วนกกุณาละ จึงถือโอกาสนี้บอกลาเพื่อนรักเพื่อจะกลับไปยังรังของตน
บัดนี้บรรดานกบริวารของท่านก็บินกลับมากันหมดแล้วอาการของท่านก็ดีขึ้นตามลำดับเราคงไม่ต้องอยู่ดูแลท่านแล้วกระมังให้พวกนางคอยปรนนิบัติดูแลท่านไปตามเดิมก็แล้วกันเพื่อนเอ๋ย
ไม่ละสหายเราไม่ต้องการอีนกชั่วพวกนี้เป็นบริวารอีกต่อไปแล้วยามเราป่วยไม่เห็นมีพวกมันสักตัวที่จะอยู่ดูแลเราจะไม่อยู่กับพวกมันอีกต่อไปแล้ว
เอาละในเมื่อท่านคิดได้ดังนี้แล้วเราก็ควรจะกล่าวเรื่องความชั่วของหญิงให้ท่านได้ฟังไว้เพื่อให้ท่านระวังตัว
ว่าแล้วนกกุณาละก็พานกปุณมุขะไปยังพื้นมโนศิลาข้างเขาหิมพานต์ก่อนจะเริ่มแสดงธรรมด้วยพุทธลีลาที่พื้นมโนศิลาให้นกปุณมุขะฟัง
ดูก่อนปุณณมุขะสหายรักเราเคยได้ยินเรื่องราวเกี่ยวกับความชั่วช้าของสตรีมากมายดังเช่นในอดีตมีนางกันหาคนหนึ่งมีผัวถึง5 คนแต่ถึงกระนั้นนางก็ยังมิวายมีชู้เป็นชายพิการหลังโค้งงอโดยปรนนิบัติกับชายพิการนี้เรากับเป็นผัวคนที่6นอกจากนี้เรายังเคยเห็นนางสมณีชื่อว่าปัญจตปาวีอาศัยอยู่ในป่าช้ากระทำลามกกับพวกนักเลงสุราไหนจะยังนางเทวีผู้หนึ่งมีนามว่ากากะวันตีซึ่งอยู่ในมหาสมุทรเป็นภรรยาของท้าวเวนไตยพยาครุฑก็ยังเคยทำลามกกับกูเวนกูเจนในการฟ้อนแล้วก็ยังมีเรื่องของนางคนงามชื่อว่ากุลุงคัตเทวีซึ่งอยู่กินกับเอลกะกุมารก็ยังไปกระทำลามกกับชพังคกุมารเสนาบดีและธนันเตวาสีคนใช้ของชพังคกุมารอีกขนาดพระมารดาของพระเจ้าพรหมทัตก็ยังเคยทอดทิ้งพระเจ้าโกศลราชกระทำลามกกับพราหมณ์ชื่อว่าปัญจานจันทะเลยเพื่อนเอ๋ย
จากนั้นนกกุณาละจึงย้อนอดีตเล่าเรื่องราวในยุคสมัยที่พระเจ้าพรหมทัตเสด็จไปตีแคว้นกาลีของพระเจ้าโกศลให้ฟังโดยในการนั้นหลังจากที่พระเจ้าพรหมทัตสังหารพระเจ้าโกศลแล้วก็ได้พาพระอัครมเหสีของพระเจ้าโกศลซึ่งกำลังทรงพระคันอ่อนๆไปด้วยและทรงตั้งให้เป็นพระอัครมเหสีของพระองค์
ไปอยู่กับเราที่วังของเราเถอะเราจะแต่งตั้งให้เจ้าเป็นมเหสีของเรา
ขอพระทัยเพคะ
หลังจากนั้นไม่นานนางก็ให้ประสูติพระธิดาสร้างความปลื้มปิติให้พระเจ้าพรหมทัตซึ่งไม่เคยมีธิดามาก่อนเป็นยิ่งนัก
ช่างน่ายินดีจริงๆในที่สุดเราก็มีธิดาคนแรกแล้วน่ารักเสียจริงๆเลยลูกพ่อเอาละเราจะตั้งชื่อลูกของเราคนนี้ว่ากันหาพร้อมกับจะประทานพรให้ด้วยไม่ว่าลูกของเราคนนี้จะต้องการอะไรเราจะหาให้ดังสมปรารถนา น่ารักจริงๆเลยลูกพ่อ
ครั้นเมื่อนางกันหาเจริญวัยขึ้นพระมารดาของนางจึงบอกว่าในสมัยที่นางยังเด็กพระราชบิดาเคยบอกไว้ว่าจะให้พรให้สมความปรารถนาแก่นาง1 ข้อโดยให้นางเลือกได้ตามความพอใจ
สมบัติหรือเราก็มีเพียบพร้อมแต่สิ่งที่เรายังขาดอยู่ก็เห็นจะมีแต่สามีนี่แหละเอางี้เสด็จแม่วานท่านบอกเสด็จพ่อทีว่าลูกขอใช้พรในการขอคู่ให้ลูกเพคะ
เมื่อพระเจ้าพรหมทัตทราบประสงค์ของธิดาแล้วก็ได้ทำการเป่าประกาศให้เหล่าบุรุษมารับการคัดเลือกเป็นคู่ของธิดาตนบุรุษทั้งหลายที่ทราบข่าวต่างแข่งกันประชันด้วยเครื่องประดับสุดอลังการและเดินทางมาพร้อมหน้ากันที่บริเวณหน้าพระลานเพื่อรับการคัดเลือกในบรรดาชายหนุ่มที่มาชุมนุมกันนั้นมีราชกุมารของพระเจ้าบรรทุราชมาด้วยทั้งสิ้น5 พระองค์ทั้ง5 พระองค์นั้นมีรูปร่างงดงามผ่องใสคล้ายๆกันยืนอยู่ใกล้ๆกันเมื่อนางกันหาเห็นกุมารทั้ง5ก็เกิดสิเนหาอยากจะได้ทั้ง5มาเป็นคู่ของตน
อุ๊ยถูกใจใช่เลยเจอรวดเดียวตรงสเปคทั้ง5 คนแบบนี้รักพี่เสียดายน้องซะแล้วเราเหมาหมดเลยดีกว่า
จากนั้นจึงโยนมาลัย5 พวงไปคล้องคอกุมารรูปงามทั้ง5
เอาละในเมื่อธิดาเราเลือกเช่นนี้เราก็จะยอมตามนั้น เราจะให้พวกเจ้าไปอาศัยอยู่ในปราสาท7 ชั้นก็แล้วกัน
นางกันหานั้นมีบุรุษคอยรับใช้อยู่คนหนึ่งเป็นคนพิการร่างค่อมเมื่อนางกันหาบำเรอสามีทั้ง5แล้วก็มักจะหาโอกาสมาทำชั่วเป็นชู้กับชายร่างค่อมอยู่เป็นประจำอยู่มาวันหนึ่งนางกันหาล้มป่วยลงราชกุมารทั้ง5ต่างก็มาคอยดูแลโดยองค์หนึ่งนวดเฟ้นที่ศีรษะอีก4 องค์คอยนวดมือและเท้าทั้ง4ส่วนชายหลังค่อมบริวารนั่งอยู่ใกล้ๆเท้าแม้แต่ในเวลาอย่างนี้นางกันหาก็ยังคงไม่เลิกกระทำชั่วหลายใจนางคอยส่งสัญญาณให้แก่ชายทั้ง6ได้ทราบว่านางรักแต่ละคนมากที่สุดและจะยกราชสมบัติให้คนคนนั้นจนกุมารทั้ง5รวมถึงบริวารหลังค่อมต่างก็นึกว่านางกันหาพยายามส่งสัญญาณบอกให้ตนรู้ว่านางรักตนมากที่สุดมีเพียงอัจฉุนกุมารซึ่งเป็นกุมารคนโตเท่านั้นที่สังเกตเห็นสิ่งผิดปกติ
จากที่สังเกตดูอาการเคลื่อนไหวมือเท้าและลิ้นของน้องกันหาเนี่ยรู้สึกว่าเวลาน้องกันหาให้สัญญาณอะไรแก่เราก็จะต้องส่งสัญญาณเดียวกันนั้นไปให้น้องเราทั้ง4รวมถึงเจ้าค่อมด้วยนี่นานี่แม้แต่เจ้าค่อมนั่นน่ะน้องกันหาก็ไม่เว้นหรือเนี่ย
จากนั้นอัจฉุนกุมารจึงเรียกให้น้องทั้ง4ของตนออกมาข้างนอกเพื่อสอบถามว่าน้องทั้ง4สังเกตเห็นสิ่งผิดปกติหรือไม่
พวกเจ้าทั้ง4เห็นหรือไม่ว่านางต่างส่งสัญญาณให้พวกเราเหมือนกันน่ะไม่นะท่านพี่ไม่ใช่นะท่านพี่ไม่นะ
ก็ว่าไม่นะ
แล้วพวกเจ้ารู้หรือไม่ว่าแม้แต่เจ้าค่อมบริวารผู้นั้นน่ะนางกันหาเองก็ยังส่งสัญญาณไปเหมือนกันไม่จริงเหรอท่านพี่
ไม่จริงเหรอไม่จริงนะไม่จริงนะพี่นะ
ดูท่านางกันหาจะไม่ได้มีเพียงเรา5 คนซะแล้วเชื่อรอยจะแอบประพฤติชั่วคบชู้กับเจ้าค่อมนั้นด้วยเป็นแน่ถ้าพวกเจ้าไม่เชื่อเดี๋ยวเราจะเรียกเจ้าค่อมมาถามบัดเดี๋ยวนี้แหละ
แล้วอัจฉุนกุมารก็ตัดสินใจเรียกเจ้าค่อมออกมาเพื่อสอบถามความจริงต่อหน้าน้องๆกุมารทั้ง4ที่ด้านนอก
ไหนเจ้าค่อมเจ้าลองบอกความจริงมาสิว่าจริงๆแล้วนางกันหาก็แอบคบชู้กับเจ้าด้วยใช่หรือไม่บอกมาเถอะไม่ต้องกลัวเราหรอกเราเพียงต้องการทราบความจริงเราสัญญาว่าพวกเราทั้ง5 พี่น้องจะไม่ทำอะไรเจ้าเด็ดขาดขอเพียงแต่เจ้าบอกความจริงมาเท่านั้น
จริงพระเจ้าค่ะนางเองก็ส่งสัญญาณให้ข้าด้วยเหมือนกันพะยะค่ะ
จากนั้นราชกุมารทั้ง5ก็ตัดสินใจว่าจะละจากการเป็นคฤหัสถ์แล้วมุ่งหน้าเข้าสู่ป่าหิมพานต์ถือเพศบรรพชากระทำกสิณบริกรรมไปจนสิ้นอายุไขและในการต่อมาอัจฉุนกุมารผู้นั้นก็เกิดเป็นพญานกกุณาละนี้เอง
People have shown much interest in studying early Buddhist history. We therefore post a series of talks on this topic by Most Venerable Ajahn Punattamo, who is an expert on the topic. Here is Venerable Ajahn Punattamo to present his third part of his talk.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So this is our third installment on the series about early Buddhist history. In the last talk, I spoke about the first and second councils, which were very formative events in early Buddhism. And the first council establishing the canon, and the second council representing the first division or split in Buddhism, the split between the Sthaviravada and the Mahasamgikas. And in the subsequent centuries, both of these main schools tended to proliferate further, and even before the arising of Mahayana, there were traditionally said to be 18 separate schools of Buddhism in India, but this number is really an underestimate. We can find at least 25 or 30 names of schools. Now, this whole area of discussion is very uncertain, and there's a lot of scholarly debate around the details. Nothing is, or very little, is really known for certain about any of it. One of the problems is the paucity of our sources. Out of these original schools, the only one surviving today is the Theravada. And as we'll see in the subsequent talks, the history of the Theravada is not so simple as to say it's simply the original root stock. But we'll leave that aside for the moment. The only complete or close to complete canon we have for any of these schools are two, the Theravada and the Sarvastivada. We have only fragments of the other schools. And in many cases, we only know them from the words of their adversaries. Two of our main sources for the doctrines of the different schools are the Theravadan text Katawatu, which is the last book of the Abhidhamma, added at the time of the Third Council under King Asoka. And this book is like a debate manual, bringing up the various points of doctrine that are raised by schools outside of Theravada, and giving sample debates of how a monk could refute these doctrines. A similar source from the Sarvastivada side is the Vibhasa, which is in part of the Vibhasa has a similar sort of theme to the Katawatu, in that it deals with the doctrines of schools differing from the Sarvastivada. So a lot of our information about all the rest of the schools comes from these two sources. So we only know about them from their adversaries, so to speak. Another issue is we have to understand what is meant in this context, in the context of Buddhist history, by a school. It's not exactly the same thing as in Christianity, say, where we talk about all the different denominations of Protestantism that are clearly defined separate communities. There's a lot of, in the Buddhist schools, they weren't always even adversaries to each other. Chinese pilgrims who traveled in India later would often report that there would be monasteries with monks mixed of different schools of thought, holding a common community but having separate teachings. Part of what's going on here is that there is a separate transmission of Dhamma and Vinaya. So although the only surviving school from these days is Theravada in both Dhamma and Vinaya, there still survives today the Vinaya of the Dharmaguptakas, which was taken up in China and East Asia generally, and the Vinaya of the Mula Sarvastivadins, which is practiced in Tibet. So even though in both cases, they've developed Mahayana or Vajrayana doctrines and established different schools of doctrine, they're holding to the original Vinaya transmission out of India from these original schools. So with these basic caveats in mind, and remembering that all of this material is rather uncertain and subject to controversy about details, let's look at some of the major schools and divisions and how they arose. As we talked about in the last installment, the first split was between the Sthaviravada, and that name is simply the Sanskrit version of Theravada. It's the school of the elders, and the Mahasamgika, which is the big group or the majority group. This is what the name means. And this dates to the period of the Second Council. To recapitulate, at the Second Council, it was decided to retain the original Vinaya, but many of the monks were not happy with this. And 37 years later, they held another council at Pataliputra. And at that time, the council broke up without coming to a conclusion and resulted in two separate communities of monks, the Sthaviravada and the Mahasamgikas. And the controversy at this council was not over Vinaya, but over the so-called 5 points of Mahadeva, which we talked about last time. Mahadeva had proposed 5 propositions that amounted to a diminution of the status of an arahant. That an arahant was not a perfected being. He was subject to various flaws. He was subject to ignorance. He was subject to having nocturnal emissions and subject to falling away. All of this is contrary to the orthodox doctrine. So those monks who accepted Mahadeva's 5 points became the Mahasamgikas. And the other monks who held to the original doctrine retained the name of Sthaviravada. And both of these schools subsequently split and fractured further. The Mahasamgikas are generally considered to be the ancestors or precursors of the Mahayana. And some of their doctrines that they developed definitely have a very Mahayana flavor. For example, I'm reading from the book The Buddhist Sects of the Lesser Vehicle by André Barrault, 1955, about the Mahasamgika doctrine. Because the Buddha, with his mind of benefited beings, is never surfeited, he does not enter into nirvana. His compassion, karuna, is limitless, his longevity is infinite. If there are beings to whom it is suitable that the Buddha should manifest his miracles and bliss of his quietude, he is born into the royal palace, etc. He accomplishes the awakening bodhi, he converts and guides those beings. If there are beings to whom it is suitable to manifest the stopping of causality, he fictitiously, nirmana, enters into nirvana. Since his mind is not surfeited, he abides in the form of a body of enjoyment, sambhogakaya, until the end of time. He creates, nimitta, forms adapted to different kinds of beings and teaches by means of skillful means, upaya. So they were turning the Buddha into a kind of godlike figure, that the Buddha is not a real flesh and blood human being, but he manifests a nimitta, a form on the earth, which they term sambhogakaya, which is a precursor of the developed ideas in Mahayana Buddhism of the 3 bodies of the Buddha, Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya. So that concept arose quite early on amongst the Mahasamgikas. So the Buddha was becoming, in their interpretation, the Buddha was becoming a kind of a celestial or divine being who only manifested in illusory form on the earth to teach beings. So this is quite different from the traditional view and the Theravada view to this day that Siddhartha Gautama was an actual flesh and blood human being who attained to supreme enlightenment. So this, of course, was a completely irreconcilable difference of opinion, and the two schools went their separate ways. To talk about the Sthaviravada and further developments in the Sthaviravada first, they split again early on, and it's debatable which was the first major split, but it seems like it very likely was a split between the root of the Sthaviravada and the breakaway group, the Sarvastivada. And some accounts date this to the Third Council of Asoka, which I'll talk about more in the next installment. But in brief, the Sarvastivada are actually pretty close doctrinally to the Theravada, but they have a number of different points, and the one that seems to have been the most controverted was the Sarvastivada doctrine of the three times. The name Sarvastivada means all exists, and they held a theory that past, present, and future all have an equal ontological status. They all exist, and it's only our perception or our consciousness that perceives the present moment, but the three times are actually all existent. This was denied by Sthaviravada, who held, as the Theravada do to this day, that only the present moment is actually real. Past and the future are have either not come into being or have ceased to be. And a thought of the past, for example, a memory, is not a perception of any real thing, but just that an image generated in the mind. The Sarvastivada became a very prominent school in northern India, particularly in the northwest. And when we encounter, for example, Tibetan writings that talk about the Hinayana, as they call it, it's the Sarvastivada doctrines that they're referencing. It seems that the Tibetans only knew the Sarvastivada or offshoots of the Sarvastivada. They were also the first school that we know of to put the Buddhist writings into the Sanskrit language. Prior to that time, the Buddhists would retain their doctrines in what are called prakrits, that is, vernaculars derived from Sanskrit, or like Pali that the Theravada uses, is a derivative of Sanskrit. It could be classed as a prakrit, except that it was probably never an actual vernacular, but it was kind of a simplified Sanskrit. It was felt by the Sarvastivadins that writing in Sanskrit gave them more of a kind of a scholarly or authoritative feel to their doctrines. The Sthaviravada at this time, the main group, we should no longer even really use that term. This is another point of confusion here. At the Third Council, they were called the Vibhajyavadins, or the School of Analysis. And there are different interpretations of what this actually meant or referred to. But the one that seems to make the most sense is that it was in distinction to the Sarvastivada. The Sarvastivada said everything exists. The Vibhajyavadins said, no, we discriminate between past, present, and future. So The Vibhajavadins were the holders of the traditional or orthodox doctrine at this point. And there were further splits. The Sautrantikas, another important school that split off from the Sarvastivada, and they were particularly known for denying the value of the Abhidhamma and holding to the sutras only. And they developed some peculiar doctrines that were tending towards personalism. They held that the 5 aggregates actually migrate from life to life. Another school, the Vatsiputriya, took this even further, and they're sometimes called the Pudgalavadins. Pudgala means the person, and a lot of the controversies in the Katawatu reference this school and their various divisions, because they continued splitting as well. But their principal idea was that there is a person outside the 5 aggregates. So these various schools were moving away from the central idea of Buddhism of emptiness or anatta. They were postulating some kind of real person that transmigrates. The Mula Sarvastivadins, another split off the Sarvastivadins, Mula means root. They were actually the branch that was probably known by the Tibetans. They were a subgroup of the Sarvastivadins, and it's their Vinaya that survives in Tibetan Buddhism. The Vibhajavadins, I mentioned already, they were the ancestors of the Theravada, and they took this name at the Third Council to distinguish themselves from the Sarvastivada. The Mahisasakas was an early split off of these. They are very close in their ideas to the Theravada. They only differ from the Theravada in some very minor points of Abhidhamma and definitions of terms and so on. Nothing of really great significance, although this was also characteristic of the period, that very small, minute, hair-splitting points could become the reason for splitting off and establishing a separate school. They were also present in Sri Lanka early on. So Theravada did not have exclusive domain in Sri Lanka in the beginning. There were some of these other early schools also had a presence there. One of the branches of the Mahasasakas became very important later as the Dharmaguptakas. And they were originally based very far away from the south. They were originally based in Gandhara, which is in Afghanistan now. And they are mostly known for the extensive missionary work that they carried on outside of India. And they proselytized Buddhism into East Asia. And so they were a major influence in China, in getting Buddhism into China. So their Vinaya, the Dharmaguptaka Vinaya, is that which survives in China and East Asia generally. And the Bhikkhuni lineage, which has now been reestablished, traces its ordinations back through the Dharmaguptaka. So these are some of the major branches of the Staviravada. And the picture is more complicated than this survey would indicate. There were many other minor schools, and some schools are hard to classify as whether they belong to the Staviravada or the Mahasamgika. Now, turning to the Mahasamgika, they too continue to split as centuries went by. And as we said, they were originally founded on the point of the 5 principles of Mahadeva, which downgraded the status of an arahant and elevated the status of a Buddha. One of their branches was the Lokuttaravadins, which means the Transcendental School. And they are the branch that was established in the Northwest. And for example, the famous Buddha statues at Bamiyan in Afghanistan that the Taliban blew up, they were probably built by adherents of this school. They emphasized further the transcendental nature of the Buddha, and they were one of the first schools to accept some of the Mahayana sutras. In particular, the early sutra, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, which is one, if not the earliest, is one of the earliest Mahayana sutras. And they incorporated that into their canon. The Gokalikas was another branch of the Mahasamgikas, and they were the opposite of the Sautrantikas we discussed earlier. The Gokalikas held that only the Abhidhamma was of value, and the sutras were only very lower grade sort of teaching fables. They weren't important. And they held that logic and reasoning was very important in the development. And they also did not fully accept the authority of the Vinaya and felt that they could kind of make up their own rules. So we kind of see, again, here something that is known later, that many of the Mahayana traditions disregarded parts of the Vinaya that were inconvenient. Finally, a very important school in terms of the development of Theravada, because this is the school that the Theravadins in Sri Lanka were probably most in contact with. These were the Andakas, who were probably the same as another school that is referred to as the Chaitakas. This is another problem in that the names, different sources will have different names for the same school. But if they were two separate schools, they were actually very close in their ideas. And they also had some proto-Mahayanist tendencies. For example, the emphasis on the Bodhisattvayana, the Bodhisattva path, which is characteristic of the Mahayana. This became introduced amongst the Andakas. They also had a teaching about something they called the Mula Vijnana, the root consciousness, which seems to have been the origin of the doctrine in Yogacara, which was a fully Mahayana school, of the Alaya Vijnana, that is the storehouse consciousness. This is a characteristic, an important doctrine of the Yogacara, that there is a kind of a layer of consciousness in which the seeds of kama are stored. The criticism of this is that it tends towards the idea of some kind of immortal or abiding essence in a being, which is contrary to the idea of anatta or emptiness. They would deny this. They have ways of interpreting it. But from outside, it's the way it seems. So these are the major schools, and as I said, there are many more. There are some rather colorful accounts that have come down to us about how some of these schools arose. There's one school that's called Bahusrutriya, and according to their own account that has come down to us, it was founded by an Arahant bhikkhu who during the lifetime of the Buddha traveled north into the Himalayas to practice meditation and went into jhana for 200 years. And then at the end of 200 years, when he emerged from jhana and returned to the populated areas in India, and he encountered monks and spoke with them, he was shocked to discover that many of the more transcendental teachings of the Buddha had been forgotten. And so he restored the original teachings of the Buddha. And this is the claim of this school. So we have a very complex picture, and the details are always not clear. But what I think is important in this picture for an understanding of later developments is that there were three Vinaya traditions that survived. One was the Theravada, which survived via Sri Lanka, and we'll see that in a subsequent talk, how that the importance of Sri Lanka in this history, that Sri Lanka was really, and actually one monastery in Sri Lanka, the Mahavihara, was the source of all modern-day Theravadins. The Mula Sarvastivada, which was a branch of the Sarvastivadis that was prominent in the northwest, like in Kashmir, and found their way eventually into Tibet, or their Vinaya at least, found its way into Tibet and still survives to this day. And the Dharmaguptaka, which sent missionaries into China and established a tradition in China that although the monks over time switched to Mahayana, began reading and incorporating Mahayana sutras and doctrines, they retained the original Vinaya. So the Dharmaguptaka Vinaya remains in place in East Asia. And it's that ordination lineage through Dharmaguptaka that is behind the modern Bhikkhuni lineage, because the Bhikkhuni lineage died out in Theravada and in Mula Sarvastivada. It's only the Dharmaguptaka lineage. The other important point here is to bear in mind the fundamental divisions in all this kind of proliferation of schools. The most important divisions historically was, first of all, the split between the Sthaviravada and the Mahasamgikas, because the Sthaviravadas eventually became the Theravadas, and the Mahasamgikas eventually became the Mahayana. But the Sthaviravada also had an important split early on between the Vibhajavadins and the Sarvastivadins. And the Vibhajavadins are the ones who eventually found their way into Sri Lanka and became the Theravadins. And they were considered the orthodox tradition at the time of the Third Council, and the Sarvastivadins were the, although they were, again, this is another echo of the Second Council and the Council of Pataliputra, because the Sarvastivadins were probably at that time in the majority. They were a very prevalent school, but the influence of King Asoka may have tipped the scales, and the Vibhajavadins were recognized as the orthodox tradition. And all these schools were operating in India from the time of the Second Council, when the proliferations began, and they increased after the Third Council under Asoka, all the way down to the time of Buddhaghosa in roughly the 5th century AD. So we're now more than 1,000 years from the time of the Buddha. And at that time, there was already not only a proliferation of these schools, but there also had arisen this entirely new Mahayana. One of the historical problems that's not resolved, and there's a lot that's not resolved in this period, the sources are contradictory and inadequate, but one of the mysteries is really where and when and how the Mahayana came in to the picture. Because we have, for example, texts from Buddhaghosa's time where in Buddhaghosa's commentaries and in other contemporaries, there was considerable criticism of the various other schools and even of some philosophical traditions outside of Buddhism, like Sankhya and Vedanta. But there doesn't seem to be any direct, clear mention of Mahayana as a separate tradition. Now, one theory is that the Mahayana at this time was known to have existed probably from the 1st century BC, was probably limited to one small area in south central India that was something of a backwater. It was off the main trade routes, and so it was little known, and the monks who lived there were not in much contact with the broader currents in India, so they were sort of free to indulge in wild speculation and go, completely off the reservation. Of course, we know Mahayana later became very powerful and influential in India and elsewhere. And this whole history of these schools, as obscure as it is, it does illustrate the first of all, the very human tendency of religions to split and divide. We know that all religions follow this kind of pattern, that they'll divide on points of doctrine and then get further and further apart. But it also illustrates a peculiarly Indian, I think, habit of mind, of the love of philosophic speculation that characterized Indian civilization, and the love of debate and learned disputes on very minor points. If we read some of these accounts of the different doctrines of the different schools, although there are some really major divergences, like the nature of a Buddha, the nature of an Arahant, and whether a person exists or not, most of the controversies were actually over very minute, obscure, hair-splitting points of interpretation of Abhidhamma. And it's very difficult for a modern person even to enter into that mindset and appreciate the importance they put on these tiny points. It seems that the Abhidhamma, as a separate Pitaka, was a later development than the suttas. We have seen that the Abhidhamma was not spoken at the first council, but it was spoken at the third council under Asoka, and the Katawatu was added at that time. And what we have the Abhidhamma of the Sarvastivadis, and we have some partial Abhidhammas from some of the other schools preserved in Chinese or Tibetan translation. And what we find is a much greater divergence The Sutta Pitakas that survive in different recensions, like the Chinese Agamas, which are probably the Dharmaguptaka texts translated into Chinese, and some of the Sanskrit texts that have been found, there are quite a large degree of agreement that everyone seemed to have the same Sutta Pitaka. But the Abhidhammas all over the place, quite different. Abhidharmas is the Sanskrit, which most of them used. The Abhidharmas were quite different from one school to another. And it seems that they were probably developed in a sense as manifestos of the different schools, as a way of stating their position. Like, this is how we interpret things, taken to a very minute level. Here we understand this and that. These factors are associated with these factors. This is the cause of this. This is the cause of that. And everything taken down to a very fine point of analysis. And the differences between the different schools were expressed primarily in their Abhidharmas. So that is a survey of the various schools of Buddhism, and what I propose to do for the next talk will be to look at the reign of Asoka and the Third Council. So I'll take my leave.
ไวยากรณ์ต้องจริงอีกต้องเก่งทำตัวแถมต้องชัวร์เรื่องขาดไม่ให้ขาดวิพัฒน์ต้องถนัดปัจจัยแถมใส่ใจก่อนลังเรียนนี่คือนักเรียนบาลีเริ่มต้นด้วยอักขระจำให้ได้นะนามศัพท์จำนวนนับคือสังขยานาติตามคือสัมพนามรวมก็สามคืออริยสัจอย่าลืมนับอาพยาอย่าให้พลาดกิริยากิจไปเอาข้อคิดในธรรมบทแล้วประโยชน์เอาไว้ต้องจำเพื่อจะนำไปสอนตัวเองซึ่งเมื่อเก่งจะได้ไปสอบยักษ์เขพันติปตันเตพานิอัมภูอังสุเรเลหิชิยักษ์เขพันติปตันเตพานิอัมภูอังสุเรเลหิชิยักษ์เขพันติปตันเตพานิอัมภูอังสุเรเลหิชิ
สิทธิ์ที่ดีเรียนพระบาลีจากพระอาจารย์ฉันจะตั้งปณิธานเราเรียนศึกษาเหมือนพระราหุลท่านกำเม็ดทรายจะไม่หวังแค่เพียงสอบได้แต่กระหายเรียนรู้พระธรรมฉันจะตั้งปณิธานเราเรียนศึกษาเหมือนพระราหุลท่านกำเม็ดทรายจะไม่หวังแค่เพียงสอบได้แต่กระหายเรียนรู้พระธรรมจะไม่หวังแค่เพียงสอบได้แต่กระหายเรียนรู้พระธรรมเพื่อจะน้อมนำพระธรรมสั่งสอนตัวเอง
Well, that's all for tonight. I am sure that everyone can benefit from our program. If you have any questions, please contact us at info@buddhadharmatv.com. See you tomorrow and good night. Namo Buddhaya.